White Mage has left me conflicted when it comes to my thoughts on it. I'm caught feeling like I'm not in sync with the thoughts of many others, and I've, for better or worse, never been one to just listen and nod my head agreeably without question. I'm rank low on agreeableness, I suppose. But when I sit down and just think for myself about the changes, I think that there are some genuinely awesome parts to it. Cure 3, for instance, has been incredibly teeny tiny super small, and now that it's finally being brought to bigger size, I think that it's, to say the least, gonna be wildly more effective in my opinion. Cure 3 is an incredibly powerful every effect burst heal on demand, and the burst aspect is actually very important versus a slow trickle that could leave your party open for successive damage to wipe them out. Really, it's a vulnerability when you aren't having that burst. Cure 3 also has no cooldown, and a big reason why Cure 3 was rarely used was because outside of the most coordinated statics, it was actually quite unreasonable to use effectively outside of very specific stack mechanics, since it would realistically miss half the party, which was obviously incredibly frustrating. Fortunately, I'm speaking from my own personal experience with that too, because it's just like, oh shoot, it missed like 2 of the DPS, well darn it. They actually weren't even that far out, but that is going to be a problem of the past soon. To put how strong Cure 3 is into perspective, Sage gets a very similar ability called Pneuma that heals you for the exact same amount, 600 baseline potency, on a 2-minute cooldown timer. Since Cure 3 is also a spell, you can also ramp it up with many effects that also impact spells, and only spells, not off GCD abilities, which is any heal amp that specifically says healing magic potency, like Temperance, Neutral Sect, Dissipation, Fey Illumination, which these effects here don't impact off GCD abilities. If it says ability on it, these don't impact it. Unless the actions state specifically healing actions, like what Asylum does, that will not impact the OGCD. Astro, for instance, doesn't have a method to enhance their own off GCD abilities, which really is the bulk of their healing options. Getting back onto the track of conversation is the Cure 3 baseline really is super strong, and it actually leverages the buffs like that Fey Illumination that a Scholar will bring, and the Temperance that may go unused otherwise. Like, as I just stated, the Neutral Sect ability from Ast doesn't impact the Ast's plentiful OGCD kit, which is actually one of the biggest criticisms that I am not hearing too much levied against the ability. Regardless, it is one of my qualms with the ability. I'm saying Neutral Sect is a bad ability. It has so many strengths to it, don't get me wrong, but it's just like, okay, but this doesn't impact a lot of the kit. It's kind of like Dissipation for Scholar. I'm kind of bringing that same energy to the ability. This is not an Ast video, so I'm moving on. Actually, a second here, guys, from editing, in that I want to mention here that Cure 3's burst can be made even more effective every minute, so every 60 seconds, by popping the ability called Plenary Indulgence, which makes it baseline with the baseline Cure 3 potency 800 AoE potency. It's going to be obviously in a burst, and that's going to be very accessible. No Asylum or Temperance or Fey Illumination 800 potency AoE. That's huge. Now, the biggest concern with Cure 3 that remains is obviously the MP economy of the White Mage, since this skill sucks up MP like none other. It's crazy. But in part, this can be mitigated with thin air charges that are basically like 15% MP pockets that you can use here or there. But the developers did make very clear during the live letter that they are revisiting the MP economy of all of the healers, not specifically White Mage, who I've talked about in excess on my channel, is pleading and begging for help in MP. This is really the hardest part for me to comment on, because obviously we don't know the numbers until like patch day, which is going to be roughly a week from now, and depending on how the developers approach this, the White Mage might be significantly less burdened with MP proms, which is obviously the hope, and obviously the developers are probably going to do that, which really makes me turn my head and look at things like FF logs and wonder how much of this data is currently skewed due to these MP concerns, such as how many White Mages are slotting in more Piety than the Astro, which would skew their data, obviously, because that's your baseline stats, especially since the White Mage's damage comes mostly, or actually 100% from their own efforts entirely. You don't get to say buff a samurai who's doing like 99th percentile pass, 99th percentile pass, then be like, okay, that's gonna boost my RDPS. Obviously, pros, cons to that can be really bad with a bad group, can be really good with a good group, you know what I get at. But this is not the video for that. To really seal off the Cure 3 discussion for good in this video though, the range change alone is very strong. If Cure 3 MP cost is reassessed to be lower, that will make Cure 3 a highly dependable option for any successive burst AoE damage that's repeated. Repeated successive, same thing. I'm derping it now. In fact, I will actually double down and say that it would become the most dependable option in the entire game just because it's gonna always be something you can do. Now, to briefly mention the Asylum radius change, because I don't think it's that crazy, if I'm honest, this is much less of a concern of mine, or it's not getting me that excited compared to Cure 3. It's a nice to have, but I won't say it's bad. It's gonna be appreciated, but it's not blowing me away. But it's not going to change much because like 8 yards was still big enough that a group with basically any coordination would stand in it, and obviously with the big glowing graphic it's like, oh, I know I'm outside of it or I'm inside of it. And if someone was out in Narnia with it, you're still going to be out in Narnia even with the 2 extra yards. I will say about the range though is this makes me feel kind of similar to Scholar Sacred Soil range being increased with this, which is a massive huge perk of Sage, is that you can directly apply the equivalent ability to Sacred Soil to teammates so that they can't just run out of the Sacred Soil field, which means that if you do have specific mechanics, which obviously Coordinated Stat will have to do, but like these mechanics require you as a group to run across the map all over the place, the heal and damage reduction, since it's clipped onto your character and you can't run out of it on the Sage, that's a huge perk of it, and I find that actually a very, 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 very powerful perk, and one reason why I was actually like leaning more into the Sage. So I look at the 2-yard radius on Sacred Soil, and I look at it on Asylum, obviously being the core point of this video, White Mage, and I'm like, okay, that's not toxic to say, but I'm just like, this is a nothing burger. Appreciate it, but Now for something more interesting, I think, would be to, like, let's just take a moment, and I'm gonna ask a silly question here, which is probably gonna actually aggravate my comment section. I'm gonna be called stupid 9,000 times, 9,001 times, because over 9,000. But what if we brought Asylum's cooldown down to 60 seconds? It lasts for 24 seconds, ticks for 100 potency, and so that is gonna be 24 divided by 3 is gonna be 8 ticks, and so it does 800 potency of healing baseline, but it also has the effect of increasing all healing, which obviously, because it has action there, is going to include the off GCD abilities by 10%. So that's pretty awesome, right? And here is where I sway from side to side. Would that be too strong of effect actually and be broken on 60 seconds? Because the closest thing that we have to that is Sage with Physis 2. Whispering Dawn from Scholar doesn't even come close, because that heal amp actually is a very significant chunk of it. Astrologian actually has many fantastic options on a 60-second cooldown too, but they do miss that healing amp. Like when you place down Earthly Star, it doesn't boost all of your OGCD healing by like 10%, although now people are gonna probably ask for that. My point is, I'm torn on 2 camps of this. On one camp, this on 60 seconds might be too strong, especially on White Mage that, as we know, can run to the bank laughing with 10% heal effect. But if that's the case, then I find it really odd that so many people discount this ability and call it garbage and gutter trash ability on 90 seconds, or some people even say, oh, I take it off my hotbar, and I'm like, what? Why? I think Asylum is a potential case of an ability that could be numerically changed to 60-second cooldown but a 15-second duration, improved accessibility, but slightly lower throughput when you do use it. But don't take away my heal amp, because to me that's like the craziest aspect of Asylum that makes it really, really punchy. Now I want to revisit the White Mage's capacity to utilize spells, which, as we established before, is really, really going to be something that the White Mage can leverage things by doing a brief recap of the Lily system. White Mage gets 1 Lily every 30 seconds that allows them to use Afflatus Rapture or Afflatus Solace, which are going to be on the GCD spells, and hence they get all of those benefits of abilities like Temperance or Scholar's Fey Illumination. Afflatus Rapture can also be kicked into overdrive using Plenary Indulgence, no different than Cure 3, very powerful. Each usage of one of those lilies acquires you 1 Blood Lily, or you acquire 1 Blood Lily, and then 3 Blood Lilies translates to an Afflatus Misery, which is quoted at 900 potency of damage right now, but that also needs to be cast on the GCD, meaning 1 Afflatus Misery cast at 900 potency is a total of 4 on GCD casts, because you get the 3 Afflatus casts, then you need to cast Afflatus Misery itself. Really, that means that the Lily system is more of a damage recuperation system than necessarily a damage gain system. But looking at the numbers right now, we have 900 divided by 4 is equal to 225 potency per Lily skill used, which obviously includes the Afflatus Misery itself. So you're losing essentially 75 potency per Lily used versus Glare. Glare is quoted at 300 potency. So rather than calling the White Mage Lilies bad and that they should be changed to off GCD abilities, I actually completely go against that idea, which I know is against a lot of sentiment, but I think that this setup and system overall is good. but I do think it could use number tweaks in order to make the damage net neutral from Afflatus Misery to Glare, and so we would need Afflatus Misery damage potency boosted up from the 900 it currently is at up to 1200. It would make the lilies use essentially the equivalent of off GCD abilities, since the main perk that many people are focused when they talk about off GCD abilities is their ability to not lose damage while also healing. This would also retain the incredibly good perk of the lilies, the abilities with the lilies to really be classified as spells and hence benefit from everything mentioned before as they do now. But I don't think that the lily system needs to be completely broken, reworked, and overhauled. I think it's a fantastic option to offer a more on GCD focused healer for those who aren't super into the high APM off GCD ability rates of bam 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 bam, everything needs to be weaved, oh my god, which is exactly what the Astrologian offers, which I know a lot of people who are just like, I don't enjoy that. So numerically it can work out to be essentially the same, so I don't see the point in necessarily destroying a system that resonates with a lot of healers to just make it basically a different Ast. I already have the Ast, and the Ast is great for many. I will never forgive the Nocturnal Sect being removed though. Nocturnal Sect was my baby. I'm still bitter over that. I love the Sage, I love the Scholar, but Nocturnal Sect, salt. Point is, to me, this is a number tweak on Afflatus Misery, and then poof, all the problems disappear. I really see it that way, honestly. Really, really good system. I already tell the comments are gonna roast me, but that's how I feel. The second damage aspect that I really would like to see revisited is adding the initial upfront potency of Dia back, or rather than even just adding it back, which it used to be 120 upfront, I'd add it up to 150. Obviously this is still a damage loss, but I do think that this would actually be a damage gain, which I know is like literally the opposite of what I just said, but I say this because is it as good as Glare? Obviously not, but I am saying that this would be helpful because during long movements where slide casting using Glare, the white mage really has no great option. And do you refresh your Dia? Okay, I mean you can. It's just doesn't have that same punchiness there, and people are just like, oh okay, you can use a lily, but that is such a waste because the lily system is very, very powerful healing. Obviously this is a last measure, last resort kind of thing, and I want to emphasize that I don't think we should just see white mage Dia spamming. I think that is not something I approve of, but I do think that it would be along similar lines to Scholar's Ruin 2 ability, which is a fantastic option that I do find myself using, especially in PF groups where it's just like, okay, I need to adjust here, like, or we're gonna wipe. I think giving that upfront potency would be really good. Now with these two changes, I genuinely believe that the white mage's damage values would be brought up to the level of the other healers. On FF logs, it's very clear that the white mage is in last place, but numerically, when you actually look at the numbers there rather than just the scary graph, they aren't actually that far behind. And so I think that these two gentle pushes with these two changes, I think they'd actually go far enough to like completely resolve this. In fact, they might even inch a little bit too far and put the white mage at front. I think these two changes alone would really do that. This brings me to Lilybell, and I think that this change is a solid quality of life change that I think a lot of people wrongly turn their nose up to this ability, because that's generally what you'll see online is people are just like, oh, Lilybell's trash, blah blah blah, trash Lily, whatever. Like at a baseline with no healing charges procced, just the baseline 200 potency per charge, that is still going to add up to 1000 potency of healing. That's significant no matter how you slice it, but mind you, people are going to be like, okay, but like Astro's Earthly Star does like 720 or whatever potency. Okay, that's true, but that's also needs to be charged up. That's also a cooldown in and of its own right. Not to mention, it is one of the Astro's basic fundamental AoE abilities. Even taking that into account, where this ability, Lilybell, truly becomes insane is in any instance where there are multiple waves of damage coming out, like P2S Coherence, which literally only hits twice, not even once, only twice. That means Lilybell is activated twice for 800 potency of healing. 400 potency twice, and then after that you get the party topped off when its duration expires of 600 potency, which this change now allows you to control when that goes out. But the point is that's a total of 1400 potency of healing, which is very, 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 very much obviously better than 700. But just talking about numbers here is actually deceptive in and of its own right, and it makes it seem significantly weaker than it even is. I took Astrologian into the same fight, P2S, at a lower item level where the party was actually at risk of dying, and you couldn't just, haha, gear exists, so I basically meme this fight, and I was really going in on the idea that I could rely on Macrocosmos to heal the same mechanic. Probably why it sticks out in my mind as such a core example of Lilybell's strength was that coherence that I'm talking about now. completely wiped the group, just dismantled us because we did not have enough mitigation, which is a totally different problem in and of itself. I get it, guys. But the first hit to the second hit, we didn't have anything buffering that, and it crushed the party because between the hits, there just was not enough extra healing. Speaking anecdotally from my own experience, and I'll see if I can get footage here, is when I take my boyfriend with Lilybell, it's basically as if the mechanic doesn't exist. I literally can ignore it after I place down my sacred soil now. That in between incoming damage spikes is really smoothed out by Lilybell without extra input, and that is the actual strength of Lilybell. Because if we look at Macrocosmos, which is obviously a very strong ability, don't get me wrong, I am not saying Macrocosmos is bad, it's definitely not, but Macrocosmos will factually not save you if you go below 1 HP, which makes the P3S's Life's Agonies mechanic, which is highly cited, very specific mechanic, it makes Macrocosmos seem very, very, very strong, but this is a very, very, very incredibly revoltingly niche mechanic to show off Macrocosmos in almost all situations. Macrocosmos from literally 1 HP for the entire party is not realistic. This is highly contrived. Maybe you will see a party down to 10%. In fact, you'll probably see it a lot during Dragon Song's Reprise Ultimate, but usually in the mass majority of content, including the final floor boss, usually you'll see your party brought down to 30, maybe 40, but rarely to like 10 or 1% or literally 1 HP. Highly contrived situation. I cannot emphasize that enough. Is it still strong though? Absolutely, but that is so niche. If we take Lilybell into the same situation, that would flatten the damage spike essentially coming in. Instead of you being dragged to that 30 or 40% that you usually see, you're instead around 50 to 60. You'll say that it adds only 20% more life to the party. And then now you can activate Lilybell yourself with this quality of life change, and when you want to top people off from there, and then from there a scholar can then trivially make up the last few percentages with Whispering Dawn or Fey Blessing, or literally just letting the fairy embrace spam the party in the background. Actually with scholar, the scholar doesn't even need to think about cardia swapping, and it's just like if the party's at like 90% HP versus 100%, it'll be resolved. This is actually something that I notice a lot in PF with other healers when I'm trying to go as DPS, is they will like paranoid boost everyone to 100%, or with different co-healers than my boyfriend, oh my god, they will paranoid get everyone to 100% HP, and I'm like, what? Don't do that. Don't need a Medica 2 when we are at 95% HP. And I digress. Getting back to the point, do I see this change helping Lilybell? 100%. Because more control over this effect lets you more confidently place the Lilybell when you need it, rather than say 15 seconds exactly before a coherence, and so that you get topped off at the very second this final coherence damage comes out, and then that's going to lead you into the next AoE with a very healthy amount of HP. Now you don't need to even think about that and placing it early, you just place it down when you want and you can pop it when you want. Really brings me to the conclusion of my thoughts on the White Mage. And so do I ultimately think that the White Mage is in a bad spot? No, I don't. I really actually don't. I think that the White Mage's MP, however, is a bit of a disaster, peace and love. But I do think that the White Mage fundamentally, with these issues addressed, that at this point all it needs, if anything, is some light gentle nudges here and there, and then I think it's going to be extremely strong. I think even right now White Mage is extremely strong. I think that a lot of people are really focused on P3S's Life Agonies, which is being always referenced. It is a very single niche, very specific mechanic, but it's also something that I myself took White Mage into it and have co-healed it many times now with a White Mage, and honestly I've overhealed it when I went in as White Mage. I'm just like, oh, I need all these things, and then I'm like, oh my god, my overhealing just went whoop. Obviously you can't one button it like macro, but you know what, it's still highly, massively doable. So with these announced changes and the coming MP changes, and hopefully some slight number tweaks to the abilities, especially like Afflatus Misery, Dia maybe, I do really think that we're going to see White Mage come back out on top. Far be it my thoughts that White Mage Lily's system needs to be scrapped and rebuilt. I think we just need more spice added onto Afflatus Misery. The system itself is solid and makes sense. Job is solid in and of itself, and the data, the FF logs data of the actual clears, the people actually going in and doing the fights, like, obviously White Mage is reliable and good. Now that's it, everyone, for this video. I know that it was a long one, but I want to get all my thoughts out and like explain why I feel the way I do. But yeah, take care and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what everyone thinks, and if you want to help support me, I'd super appreciate if you dropped a Lilybell on that like button and cat daddy that subscribe button. Anyhow, take care everyone, and have a fantastic day and be awesome.